Well, hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. We're thrilled that you're here. And I am thrilled and very honored to be on stage, as it were, with one of my great heroes, Milton Glaser. And I'm almost speechless. And it's funny, because a week and a half ago, we phoned each other and had a conversation about what we were going to talk about and show, and et cetera, et cetera. And he's very sneaky and very modest, because he certainly didn't mention that he'd be going to the White House anytime soon. And so, of course, then 3-4 days ago, I'm watching C-SPAN, and there's Milton and Obama on TV. So I guess the first thing I'm going to ask you is, after Obama gave his speech, and then he came down to all of you awardees, he came to you first, and he whispered something to you. And so I want to know what it was.
He said, follow me and we'll take a photograph together.
Wow, okay. No policy stuff.
No policy stuff.
And I don't want to dwell on this, but it's amazing that you got this award. And what was had you met him before?
I have never met him, no.
And what was your impression?
Well, he is the only political figure I have ever met that one could apply the word adorable to. He's an extraordinarily charismatic and attractive man, and just as he appears on television, except even more amplified in person. I mean, it just has the kind of authenticity and charm that you hope he would have. Mm-hmm. And he seems very real and very decent and very caring, and you believe it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very good to hear. Was Michelle there?
She was there, looking perfectly lacquered.
Lacquered, okay. So let's start with some of the images that you brought to show.
You want to just start with that?
Sure.
You wanted to talk about, I thought it was amusing, also out of your own experience, about working with authors.
Right, sorry. Right. I can set this up. Milton, of course, has done many book covers, but we were talking about when you have a kind of like relationship with the author that goes beyond client, that they're like social friends, and that right. You've done a lot of work for them, and it builds up over the years, and how does that affect how you do the next cover for them, and et cetera, et cetera. And so for Milton currently, the author is Philip Roth. And so we thought we'd start with...
Let's start with a few jackets that I've done for Philip, who is an old friend. And The Plot Against America. He's an interesting guy to work with, because invariably he comes to you with the solution to the jacket. I mean, he tells you what he wants. In this case, he said, there's an engraving that I have, and I want you to put a swastika on it, and use the engraving on the back, and then use it on the front. And so in that case, it was a matter of color selection and type choice, right? You didn't really feel that there was a lot of breathing room. And as it happened, I thought that his idea for the jacket was perfectly valid in terms of what he wanted to do. So pretty much, Philip art directed this all the way. Mm-hmm. And I think you only can do that when you're working with somebody you truly respect, and where you feel that his intrusion on your autonomy is appropriate.
Right.
Otherwise, if it's a trivial author with a mediocre mind, you become enraged.
Right, yeah.
So that's how that came about. On the other hand, with Exit Ghost, Philip didn't have any ideas, and I thought the easiest solution for that was really a typographical one. So there the whole idea, not much of an idea, was have exit reflect the kind of luminosity that you see when you're looking at a sign in the back, right?
Right.
And I realized there is a kind of continuity between Exit Ghost and The Humbling, because as you see, the word ghost has a little reflection of the red of Exit on it, which I might say was perhaps the only graphic idea that was distinctive about it. And as a result of that, in terms of a typographical jacket, it has some interest. I tend to be more typographical when I do a cover for Philip, because his visual impulses are so profound that an image becomes perhaps more intrusive on his vocabulary of form. So they, as you see, they tend to be more typographical than anything else, which is not necessarily characteristic. And then there was indignation, which I thought you could do something with the word. I don't know whether I really like this jacket or hate it. It has such a perverse kind of design. It doesn't quite look like my work, but dealing with a single word, using it on diagonal gave you the advantage of being able to make it larger without condensing it.
Does the marketing departments ever get involved?
Philip has total authority over his own jacket, so they never even look at it until it's over. And if they do, and if there is an argument, Philip usually solves it by being exceedingly stubborn, which he is as a personality. And also very resistant, you know, as you probably have experienced in your own life. There's some resistant personalities that result in better work, where you sort of feel, so because their resistance always seems to be about raising the level as opposed to getting their way. There is a distinction between those kinds of personalities. In the case of Philip, you can convince him otherwise. If what you do is basically better than what he had thought of. And so...
And he'll admit it?
He'll admit it, and which is a very nice thing for a stubborn man.
Yes.
And I was just saying that in the case of The Humbling, the whole idea there was to take the beam of light and penetrate part of Philip's name with it sort of going through the floor. And I realized that that is a kind of cousin to the idea of shedding light from Exit onto Ghost. So, and part of the conversation we're having tonight, I think, is about the connectedness of all these things, that when you start work as a graphic designer, I suppose, in anything else, that the works tend to be connected. And what I'm showing tonight are really things that are defined by their relationship to something that occurred previously, which I think is a nice way to look at this stuff, because as you know, in these kind of presentations, mostly it's, and then I did, and then I did, and then I did. And without too much observation of what the continuity means. And so tonight, what I really want to explore with you a little bit is the idea of how a designer learns. Because one of the things about being in the practice of graphic design, I assume some of you are in it, is that you tend to be bound by the professional requirement, which is a functional one. And what you don't find yourself doing is playing enough with the idea of color and form so that you can intensify your vocabulary of form. And each job tends to be discrete, so sometimes there's no sort of continuity between one another. And unlike a painter, who have the benefit of being able to paint a picture and learning something, going into the next painting, learning something, going on to the next painting, that possibility for development, which is so essential to anybody engaged in the arts.
Do you not think of yourself as a painter?
No, I mean, I don't paint that much. I mean, I would define myself as a painter if I did more painting, but
It just as part of you, not, you know.
Well, I have done a lot of illustration in my times, sometimes painted and sometimes drawn. There are those distinctions. But, so anyhow, and then I might say that the most recent work of Phillips, which is not yet published, is this extraordinary book. It's just absolutely marvelous. The Humbling, I don't think was so great. It was one of those books, The Humbling was one of those books where you said, well, the old guy's lost it. You know, he finally, he's been around so long, working so long, and he doesn't have it anymore. It was a kind of depressing book and not very well conceived, either technically or in any other way. For me, this book, The Nemesis, is absolutely breathtaking.
What's it about?
It's gorgeous. It's about the heat wave in New Jersey, and a young man who contracts polio. But it's a book extraordinarily heroic, sad, powerful. The image on the front is about the sun, but it relates to the most beautifully written description that I've ever read of Phillips, of a javelin in flight. And it's about the arc of the javelin. And it's a kind of writing about something ordinary, you would say, that breaks your heart and makes you cry. It's that kind of intense experience. I recommend this book to all of you.
When does it come out?
It's coming out. I think it's a spring book. I think it's going to be out for a while. It's also one of those cases where I took advantage of the flaps and the front and the back to make a singular image. I haven't done that very often, but it seems to work this time.
How far back do you go with him? What was the first book?
Oh God, I don't even remember. It was a very long time ago. I did all his books that were published in England. I met him playing softball in Woodstock many, many years ago.
That's how you met?
Yeah.
Were you on the same team, or?
No, I don't remember that. He was a very good softball player. And he was a good friend then of Peter Mayer, who's also a good friend of mine as a publisher. And he was living in Woodstock intermittently, and we have a house there. So we met socially, and then would occasionally meet socially, and then he asked me to do a jacket. And it's a very nice relationship because one has to have respect for Philip, as he is a fantastic author.
Certainly. My God, he's one of the best.
Yeah, he is. Might be the best.
Yeah. Now that Updike's dead.
So, but what has your experience been with authors that you also knew personally, where the issue of working together was?
There's been so many different ones, it's hard to explain. Like I just mentioned Updike, and that's a very long, complicated story because we're from the same hometown, and his father was my father's math teacher.
Oh, isn't that funny?
And then the first assignment I got in school at Penn State, Graphic Design 101, was to design a cover for a John Updike collection of short stories, which I did, and then the teacher basically spent 10 minutes explaining why it was bad and that probably this was an area of graphic design that I should be steered away from, which is a quite true story, unbearably. But and then I end up getting this job at Knopf designing covers for John Updike. But we weren't social in terms of like having dinner together or anything like that. But he loved the hometown connection, and but he was all over the place. It was like you were saying with Roth. Like he would draw the whole thing out for you, and then you just had to somehow make it happen. And then sometimes it would be, go for it, just do whatever you want. And then sometimes it'd be something in between. Like the last one I worked on for him was a novel called Terrorist, which he found the image, and it was a reflection of somebody walking on a rain-slicked sidewalk in New York, and I turned it upside down. And he loved that. But he never would have thought of that. And, oh my God, it's wonderful. So, and like Roth, he was very, very prolific. So there was like a book a year to work on, at least. And then, I don't know, there's people like this guy, Augustin Burroughs, Running with Scissors, and that's pretty interesting. It's usually like it was like no problem, no problem, no problem, and all of a sudden there was a problem. And with the jacket, and then it went back to in-house, and then they didn't like the way it sold, so then they came back to me, and blah 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 blah. It all depends, but it can get tricky when, like, I was dealing with Augustin directly, and that's and he's a separate publisher than the one I work for, so that worked great until it worked horribly, and the publisher gets very upset. They get very angry.
Well, one of my rules of life is that you can't work for anybody that you don't like, and that when you're working directly for an author, it's fine if you like them, but if you don't, it's a horror. And I find that to be absolutely a sort of baseline for me. That
so you've never. Well, at what point did you get to the point where you didn't have to work with anyone you didn't like?
Well, no, that's a good question, because at the beginning you'll work for anybody.
Because I'm not there yet.
Right? No. The earlier the better. Because working for somebody you don't like just makes the experience horrible. And working for somebody you have genuine affection for, and I'm not just talking about, sort of somebody you like casually, but somebody you really like. And that kind of amplifies the whole effort to produce something mutually. It actually diminishes the sense of your own narcissism when you do that, because you really want to share the experience with somebody. And that more often than not results in a better level of work than a sort of passive relationship with somebody. But it's a great ground rule. Unfortunately, as we all know, it's not so easily attained.
No,
right?
No, it's not.
And you have to be persistent to find it. So, but it's a good rule. Anyhow, I don't remember where we went from here. Oh yeah. Did you want to continue on that literary thing at all?
Yes, but I could listen to you talk about that stuff all night, and I'm sure I'd love to hear. Let's just keep going, because
well, so I want to show you some things which, in general, about this subject of everything is connected and everything comes around again and everything represents an opportunity to do something else. This, for some reason, and I don't really understand it, I started designing rugs at the studio. It became a kind of obsession. I sat down one day and said, I'd like to design some rugs. And so I started. And I had a wonderful young woman who was still working for me named Molly, and we would, at the end of every day, if we had a couple of hours that we weren't involved in doing some real project, we would design a rug. And so we started. Here's the typical kind of rug that I would do. It's very strange. It's sort of a little like a landscape. And the thing I did, which really became interesting, I began to play with color in a way that I just had done in other projects. One of the reasons being that most of the work you do in graphics has to be visible. Well, not a profound statement, I mean. And so you always are working with contrast and high definition between forms, and the worst thing you can do is to do a job that's not visible, right? And so you're always working that end of the spectrum, right? But it's a kind of limited spectrum, and everything's sort of at full intensity. But in rugs, for instance, you don't have to do that. And so here's two versions, both of which are not quite visible. One a dark version and the other a light version. And the color range is sort of odd and not the kind of thing you would use publicly for a poster or for a jacket or anything else. But it was because of this difference in meaning that the color has and the forms have that I became so intrigued with the idea of doing it.
Now, what would the scale of these things be?
Well, they've been made into rugs. What happened, as it does so often in life, one day a guy from Tibet walked in and he asked me if I would design some rugs for him. And I said, I already have some in stock. So, some of these, I think 8 of them are going to be shown in California this spring. So a lot of these are actually became real.
So they're made in Tibet.
They made the beds. Yeah, they were all handmade.
Wow.
Kind of.
And like what, 8 by 8 feet or?
Well, they're 8 by 10. They're big. They're big. And here's another one. I mean, you also started working with forms that would make no sense if you were doing anything else that had to communicate an idea. And these are these funny, I don't know, biological forms, which just came together in this strange way. I became so fascinated by the distinction between the two that are created entirely by the color. I mean, these are the same forms exactly. Of course, we know that variations in color make difference, but I was shocked by how different they became, how different their graphic and tonal and psychological effects were.
And to what extent do you create these on the computer?
They're all created on the computer.
They're all created on the computer?
Well, it's not quite true. In the other one, they were all first drawn and then scanned and then fiddled with and so on. These were drawn, I'm sorry, the shapes were drawn, and then they were assembled and put together and modified on the computer. I like that combination very much of being able to draw and modify, modify. The kind of iteration between the machine and the hand I think, is richer than working either way. I've gotten to love the computer. People don't expect that of me.
Wow, that's going out on the web, you know.
No, I love the computer. I just hate stupid work that's done on the computer. And also, there is a question about if you start on the computer, you never develop a sense of form in the same way that if you start by looking at something, the eye, the brain, the path, down the arm, the drawing, and then the dialectic between the brain and the hand. I mean, that doesn't happen. And there's a loss there. I can't even define what that loss is, but
when I had interviewed you for the Believer, 4-5 years ago, you had said that you felt that graphic designers shouldn't be able to start using the computer till they're in their 40s. Do you
40, 45.
So that still holds?
Absolutely. And this was entirely computer generated. It just dots and patterns. And the interesting thing about that are those strange. You can actually see it better here than you can. It projected those dark spots in the middle, which is...
Is that an accident?
Well, I would say it was an intention I was not conscious of. But
okay.
What I love is when these things happen, these mysteries happen, because that's a truly metaphysical object. Where you begin to what are those dark spots? So you look at
and then when you look closely, they go away.
Disappear, yeah. So there are a number of them that occur. Here's.
Oh, you can't see them. Well, I can't see them.
You can't see them well here as you can the other.
Can you see them when you're farther?
6 of them.
Yeah, there's 6 of them.
Yeah. And then this was kind of really only about color and a mandala, and just to see experientially and sort of visually what this extraordinary difference that shifting any one of these colors makes. Mostly, I was so interested in the emotional response you have to these forms. I started, this is actually, I have one of these rugs in my home. It started as a print. It was a silkscreen, and then it was translated into a rug. And what is very nice is to see the distinction between what happens when you produce something physically in pigment and then when you actually make it out of fiber. I mean, everything changes and the relationships change. But this was actually drawn and assembled for drawing. And then just something as simple as a stripe to see what the color does when modifications are made. And here there's a mystery in this moiré, right?
Right.
The stripe varies ever so slightly in width, and what happens are these waves that you see
So is
right?
that a computer effect, or is that?
Well, you could, I've done this by hand, but it comes about entirely from the slightest difference in width of the line. And then that produces optically this crazy wave. And the idea that you're looking at something that you believe that doesn't exist is rather eerie. Well, that's probably true every day. But then I used that background to make this poster. So I used the pattern that I had produced, then crumpled up a piece of paper, and then shot it photographically. There's something very nice of going through that whole series of events. First you draw something as a sketch, and then you make the computer do it, and then you crumple it, and then you photograph it, and then, I mean, because something...
Put it up in the subway.
And then you put it in the subway.
So did this start as a drawing?
It certainly started as a sketch that I did before I started anything. Yeah. And there's a difference also with premeditated stuff that you then have an idea and you move towards execution. And things that happen in the process of making that, which happens a lot on the computer. More often while you're going from one thing to another, and what's in between is what you're interested in.
And the idea that the crumpled piece of paper is the same as the background means
Nothing.
nothing. Okay.
No.
The secret. I mean, I like it a lot. It just...
Well, it's an issue of time. That the crumpled piece of paper is the same piece of paper that it's in the background, right? If you crumpled the background
you would get that.
With that lettering, you would get, right, and the idea being that you have to throw away a lot of stuff before you get the secret of art.
Right. So. I like it a lot.
And it's a card that I did and sent out where the difference between the color is really fascinating. This was printed on a vellum, on a background with a vellum sheet that covered it. But this is a poster for my show at SVA last year. Mm-hmm. And it says, "Looking is not seeing." And I'm so fascinated by the barely perceptible, mm-hmm. what you have to work at to see, and what darkness is. And the interesting thing about this poster is that the longer you stare at it, the more the color emerges. There's a tremendous amount of color in this, but in order to see it, you have to stay with it for 2 or 3 minutes, and the color begins to emerge. You can actually see it more, I think, there than there because of this light. But the idea of what you have to go through to see anything really captured my imagination as a result of doing these exercises.
And of course, this is the opposite of a Philip Roth book cover in terms of that.
I would say so, right? I mean, it presumes duration of a kind that you never have in graphics. Right. You really have to work at seeing it. And the whole idea of graphic material is that if you don't get it in a quarter of a second, the game is over.
Right.
So it is that other end of the spectrum that I found, perhaps because there's so little opportunity to work this end of the spectrum, mm-hmm. that I found so fascinating. And then this is another rug. What was interesting is that the one on the right, sort of turned up later in an application here, which is at the School of Visual Arts. I designed the theater. And this is that same pattern on the right, the little dot pattern going through the green fields, applied to metal, bent metal, finished with automobile paint, so that there were 2 kinds of reflection, right? One is a reflection, symbolic reflection of the dots, and the other are the real reflection of the lights in, mm-hmm. in the room. I quite like this. This is the bar at the theater. It's on 23rd Street, between 8th and 9th Avenue. And this was one of the designs I was working on as a rug, and then I used it for the rug at the theater.
Mm-hmm. Now this is the SVA Theater. Oh, okay.
And this is so funny because all this was a photograph of the interior before I started to do it with pieces of colored paper that I cut out arbitrarily. And they had no idea of where I was going in terms of doing an interior. And as it turned out, it is the interior. I mean, it's so funny when the most tentative.
When was the theater built originally?
Originally?
Or is it a brand new building?
No, it's an old theater.
Right, that's what I thought.
Yeah, and it just was, we stripped it and retrofitted it. And here, just this idea that all the qualities of this finished thing, which is architectural now, was anticipated by a couple of pieces of scrap paper. Always amazes me.
And the architect that you worked on with this was who?
There really was no architect.
There was no architect.
Okay. I mean, this was all kind of decorative architecture. You had an existing shell. And in this case, all it was is specifying that curved wall, which is very voluptuous, designing the little coffee bar and putting these panels around the room. So it's not quite what you would call architecture. But again, here's a study for the facade of the theater. And then further development is what the theater will look like. It now has that object on the right, which is based on Tatlin's homage to the Third Republic, which you remember is that wonderful model that was never done, that you always see 1,000 pictures of, Russian constructivists. And this mural that is, they're still negotiating with the city to put up.
I was going to say I've been there and I didn't see that.
The mural is on hold, as they say, but they say they're getting close.
What's the problem?
Whether it's an advertisement or a work of art more than anything else. I mean, it has to be determined in terms of its function in relationship to the street and to society or whatever else it is. They say they're getting there.
Calvin Klein doesn't seem to have those problems.
He doesn't. And this is a little study model for the sculpture. It rotates so that those bands, those color bands, become very activated when you see them. Here's how it actually looks on the facade. The background to that will be steel after they get the money to do it. And this is what it looks like at night. We have a little video.
It's very, very cool. I've been there for a couple of events now, and it's really worth checking out.
And it also is, during the day, it's a clock that has an aphorism, like it's 1 o'clock, time to think about the meaning of your life.
Can we put that off till midnight or something?
And then another job, I worked for a theatrical company called Tafana, the worst name for a theatrical company imaginable. And they do modern versions of Shakespeare. So I did a bunch of, these are only a small number of a bunch of portraits of Shakespeare. The great benefit of doing Shakespeare is nobody really knows what they look like, so you can get away with. I've never been terribly good at likeness. And this is a proposal, an early proposal for their new theater at BAM. And the idea was to have many portraits of Shakespeare or one giant portrait of Shakespeare. In the lower left is a design I did for their annual award, which is called the Willie, I guess, and will be enlarged to be 6 or 7 feet tall in front of the theater.
Any idea when that will get built?
It's under construction.
It is, okay.
Yeah, they're doing it now. And then there was this series of prints all about the same idea, blackness. and working at perception, so that these are really hard to see. They turned out to be totally unsaleable because you can't put a piece of glass over them. As a result, you would have to hang them unprotected, and that is not what anybody wants to do. But, so let me just show you those.
Are they silkscreen or?
These are all giclées. They're all electronic prints. And now, finally, just a series of drawings from my book, Drawing is Thinking, which I stupidly forgot to bring tonight, so that you can't buy it here. But the idea of the book was to take a bunch of drawings that had a hidden connection on facing pages, so that the experience of looking at was this kind of continuity of form that existed, that was perhaps not easily available as you looked at it, but that.
And these are drawings that timeline
Over the last 30 years.
over the last 30 years.
Yeah, and so they vary considerably, both in quality and meaning. But I won't show you the whole book, but I'll just show you a series. And here, for instance, obviously, it's the ideas about what a profile is. But each of them has this kind of relationship that moves you. For instance, here the relationship is the yellow on the left-hand page and the spill of light on the right-hand page.
So it's almost like it's shining on.
Right, and that the whole job was going through, several thousand drawings and seeing what made sense next to each other.
Wow.
It took a year to do, only to select the pictures. So. That's Monet, and that's Monet's couch, but you wouldn't know that.
So did you write commentary, or is it like a puzzle that needs to be figured out by the?
That's everybody's job. I mean, these are both after Piero della Francesca. So.
Do you draw every day?
No. That's it. That's all the pictures.
Well, that's all the pictures. Something that we were talking about a bit backstage, as it were, and this is a completely different subject change. When you, in the 70s, when New York was in not so great shape, you created this logo that played an enormous part in bringing New York out of its problem. How do you see the city now compared to then? Do you have any? What's your take on? Are we on the upswing? Is it still in the toilet? How does it compare to back then?
It's so hard to tell. What was happening then, which I remember distinctly, was everybody was moving out. And because life had become so difficult here, unpleasant in many ways, as you remember, the streets were never clean. There was dog shit everywhere. You could sort of tell the sense that people have about their own city by the amount of dog shit you walked into every day. And which was just reflective of the beginning of decline of services and so on. I begin to see that now as the streets seem dirtier to me. I don't get the same sense that people are anxious to get out in the same way as they were in the 70s. And for some reason, something is keeping despair at bay. I don't know what it is. Maybe partially people just are experiencing the liveliness of the city and the attractiveness of the city. I mean, the energy of the city does not seem to be diminished, strangely, at this time. So maybe it's simply that the realization hasn't struck home. Maybe we're about to get depressed as subway services diminish, right, and they cut the bus lines, and where the actual cost of living in the city becomes higher in terms of personal comfort and so on. Certainly the fact that it's probably easier to buy an apartment now than it was a couple of years ago has kept some people in. You would have thought that a lot of people would have been driven out, but they went to Brooklyn instead.
Right, right. Have they, whoever they are, approached you about, hey, let's do the next I Heart New York?
No, I don't think they have. I don't think there's a energy for that in some way, for an initiative on the part of city government. Do you? I don't get the sense that that's on their mind at the moment.
Well, when you did the original one, was that a city commission or a state commission?
No, that was a state,
right.
A state idea. And you know, primarily it was intended to restore tourism to the state.
Right.
So many people were afraid to come here. And when they were talking about tourism, they were talking mostly about New York City anyhow. But because the crime rate had risen and they had dissuaded people from coming, suddenly the state was beginning to suffer economically. So the campaign, while it was for the state, was really very much involved in what was happening in New York City.
Do you occasionally think, oh, if I were to try and do this again, this is what I would do, and would come up with some sort of plan?
This never occurred to me.
Yeah. And how, we were talking before about the two of us have completely different business models.
Yeah.
And how has the state of the economy affected yours? And how do you, has it made you change your business? Has it made you change the clients you work for or look for or what have you?
Well, my business has gone through a lot of changes through the years, but because I've been around for so long, I've sort of done every kind of business. I once had 50 people in the office when we were doing supermarkets, and so they were all busy doing mechanicals for interiors and packages and so on. I hated that. And so now I have 6 people and myself, and it's a much better structure for me. And there's no question there's much less work around, and the fat has gone out of the system. I mean, everybody is worried about every nickel. And it's just tougher. I mean, it's tougher. And for people who are starting, it's very, very rough. On the other hand, there's an awful lot of pro bono work that one could be doing. I mean, there are more free jobs or jobs that don't pay anything but have either some public benefit or don't that come in every day.
And are you besieged with that stuff?
Yeah, we get enough of that, and some of it is worth doing, and then a lot of it isn't. But the pace of work for us is fine. I have more modest objectives since I'm no longer worried about whether I will survive or not.
I know the answer to this question already, but I'll just ask it. Do you ever intend to retire?
Oh, God, the retirement is death. I mean, retirement was a fraud perpetrated on the innocent. I mean, you remember how the idea of retirement occurred. There was no such thing as retirement until the point where the boys were coming back from the war and there were no jobs for them. The government began to say, why don't we pay people money so they can get out of the workforce? It's all a fraud, retirement. What a dreadful idea. On the other hand, I mean, for people who hate their work, that's another story.
Right,
But,
right.
you know, for us, I love waking up in the morning and think I have someplace to go. And when I get there, there's a possibility I may learn something I don't already know. What could be more glorious? No, until I really become so feeble that I can no longer walk over to the computer, I intend to continue.
one thing we'd also talked about before that I hope you don't mind talking about is that when I was in school, my best friend was a woman named Barbara DeWilde who spent a year in New York, and she took your class at SVA. And she came back and she was telling us all about it, and it just sounded truly, truly astonishing. But one of the assignments, which I've never forgotten, and which I could never figure out what it meant, but it was fascinating, was, and correct me if I'm wrong, that all the students, I think for a week, need to keep a precise record of what they've eaten. And then they turn in these lists, and you assign anonymously a list to everybody gets somebody else's list of stuff. And then based on that, I guess they have a week or so to create a portrait of that person.
And a description of their life.
And a description of their life. Can you just tell me about this? And that some of them are remarkably accurate.
Chillingly accurate. I mean, what happens, and one doesn't understand this at all, you get a list and you do a portrait and you write a description of somebody you basically don't know. I mean, this is, I do this in my 1 week intensive. I don't do it in a regular class because people know each other, they know their eating patterns, and they can figure it out. But this is a group of strangers, and they get this diet, and they write. They have to do it under certain circumstances. First, they're very tired. It's at the end of the week, and they are exhausted. I mean, they've been deprived of sleep and just information overload. You have to be exhausted in order for this to occur. And then I tell them the process is very simple. They have to sit down, they have to read the menu, and then they have to read it again, and then they have to wait another half hour. They have to read it again, and then just wait until something happens. And when they do that, they write the description of this person. They do a drawing of this person. And it is so eerie because in many cases they know things they have no right to know. They will write about somebody who had a fight with their parents early, moved out, went to college, had an abortion, got married, never told their husband about their abortion, and not, even to this day regrets the relationship they had with their parents, but has never been able to reconcile it. Well, you wouldn't think somebody would know that from their diet,
Not based
would
on
you?
a Pop-Tart. I mean, no.
Or somebody will describe a room and they'll say, there are 2 bedrooms. One has an iron bedstand in it with white bedding, and then adjacent to that is a much more luxurious, describing their home, a much more luxurious room. And the oddest thing, it has purple sheets. And I would say, well, anybody answer to that? Somebody raised their hand. I say, iron bedstand? Yeah. Purple sheet? Yeah. So.
Whoa. I mean, wow.
Well, it's not so crazy when you realize that thought is energy, right? And energy is transmittable. And we don't know how that works. I mean, it's actually no more remarkable than a radio. Right? So that radio over there, the message is coming from someplace else, and it's like that. Anyhow, if you look at there is so much that we know that we don't know we know, right? I mean, you're always shocked when somebody tells you about things that they have observed or thought that make no sense, and because fundamentally everything is connected. There is nothing that isn't connected to everything else.
So I guess is that the point of this assignment?
Well, the point of the assignment is paying attention. The thing about teaching, which is most important, is to make people aware of what it is they are doing, already doing. Because if people don't know where they are, they can't begin to go anywhere. So the idea, which I think is relevant, is attentiveness in the Buddhist sense. You have to pay attention. You have to pay attention to your own mind and its wanderings, and also to the nature of reality. I have a theory about art that I've developed in recent years, because all my life I've been wondering, well, what is art, like many people do, think? And what's the difference between art and not art, right? And what I finally arrived at is that art is fundamentally a survival device of the species. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so persistent. It wouldn't be in every culture, and we wouldn't know about it, right? So the question is, well, what do you mean by survival? How does art help you survive? And I said to myself, it helps us survive by making us attentive. In a simplistic way, when you go past a forest and you look at it and you say, that looks just like Cézanne, and you realize that Cézanne has made you see the reality of a forest in a way that you never could have seen it before. He has made you attentive. And every work of art that we care about makes us attentive. And if it doesn't do that, it ain't art. So that's where the distinction occurs, and it also is the reason that a poster by Lautrec can be a work of art, even though it has a purpose, and it's functional, and it's designed, and it has another meaning, because Lautrec couldn't help it. He was an artist, and everything he did, regardless of its intention, moves us in a way that we see reality differently. The whole idea is to understand what is real, which is not so easy.
Mm-hmm. The Lautrec thing's interesting. I was just thinking about that the other day for some reason. Scary. That he's one of the few fine artists who really was a graphic designer. And yet he's pretty much perceived as a fine artist, and that whole distinction, which frankly always makes me crazy. But do you see that distinction? Does that distinction mean anything to you?
Well, I think the distinction is clear. And it is, if the work makes you attentive, it's art, no matter what its form, right? If you see what is real differently, it's doing its job. And that's the only distinction I made. It's not a utilitarian distinction. It's not a decorative distinction. It's a functional distinction in the difference between something that makes you aware and something that doesn't do that job, but does another job, you know. So the decorative can also make you attentive or not, depending on whether it has that capacity. So besides money, status, and all the other things that sort of accrue to the definition of art, it seems to me the simplest way of distinguishing what is art and what is not is if it helps us survive through attentiveness. It's also an interesting thing because beauty, the idea of beauty, and we are programmed for beauty, isn't the reason art exists. Beauty is the cheap trick that enables us to encounter attentiveness. You know, something is beautiful, we pay attention to it, and then we move into the real purpose, which is to discover what's real.
Wow.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to go in that direction necessarily.
Why not? I think it's a pretty good direction for me. I think we would like to start taking a couple of questions from the audience now.
With the advent of the new iPad and Kindle and the Sony Reader, how do you see that impacting the designer's field?
That always used to be the last question. And now it's the first question. Do you want to weigh in on that?
I don't know. I mean, what we know is technology changes everything, right? It changes values, it changes definition of what art is, it changes. So who knows? And also, it's unpredictable. I mean, you might say that all this new technology will come with a greater reverence for human contact. Well, What makes you say that? I don't know. I don't know. If it's, I think that kind of forecasting is so illusionary, right? There's just no way of anticipating where this is going to take us.
I'm lousy at that. I was like, the iPod, who's gonna want that? But I don't know. I mean, for the past couple of years, I've been getting this question all the time. Like, are you worried that you will be out of a job and this kind of thing? And for years, I kept saying, like clinging to that shred of hope. Well, I think we'll be fine as long as Apple doesn't get into the whole ebook reader thing, and because the Kindle looks like something you would use to test your blood sugar, and it's I don't know. I mean, I do believe that the printed real book. I mean, my whole raison d'être, to use this fancy French phrase, is to make, and I think Milton does this too, is to make books into desirable objects that you want to have. Whether it's a novel or a collection of poetry or what have you. And that's not arguably what the New York Times is, or even Time magazine. I mean, there are certain magazines you want because they are objects. But frankly, I mean, and I love the New York Times, and I will subscribe to the paper edition until there's no more breath in my lungs. But you don't have that because it's just so gorgeous and I want to hold on to it. You want to get the news and throw it away. And I don't feel that way about books. I really see books as literally an archival thing. And I personally, as a graphic designer, I'm literally a materialist. I like making the stuff, and then I like getting the stuff that I made, and then I like having it, and then organizing it around and what have you. Which is very narcissistic, but there it is. But I'm not into design that can be turned off with a switch. So we'll see. I mean, there's definitely going to be something going on there, and that's about as much as I can offer. Yes.
Hi. Hello. Oh.
Hello.
On my way here, I saw a guy wearing a sweatshirt that said, "Go heart your own city." And I was wondering how you feel, Mr. Glaser, about people modifying your work and making fun or plagiarizing or what have you. But how do you feel about people taking your design and making it into something else?
Have people done that?
Well, one of the things you want to do as a designer is communicate to people in some way, or feel that your work has been seen or heard. And I think it's wonderful that something you do enters into public consciousness. I have no misgivings about anybody who does anything with something that I have done. And I'm enormously grateful that something I have done has sort of become useful to people. I have no idea why it ever happened. I mean, you do a lot of things in your life, but for one reason or another, that particular banal image became something everybody thought they could use. And not only here, I mean, it's just something that's a worldwide object.
Do you remember the first time you saw it ripped off?
No, I don't even remember that. I thought it was something that, like many other things I've done, that would last 6 or 7 weeks as part of a campaign. And here it is, a century afterwards, and it's still on the. I can literally, it's probably true of anybody who lives in New York, you can't go into the street without seeing it at least 10 times a day, and you wonder, when is it going to go away? It's weird.
That's a never, I think. I think there's one there.
Hi, this is a question for you both. I'm just curious what fine art or art you have in your own homes, or what artists make you see reality differently?
That's a nice question. Curiously, I was mentioning to Chip early in the evening because we are both concerned with the accumulation of all the stuff in our life. But I moved about 3 years ago, and my wife and I disposed of 2/3 of the things we owned, including a collection of African sculpture. We had 140 pieces, now we have 10. And a lot of other things that we couldn't fit into a smaller apartment. And now I guess I have the things I love best. There are 2 Steinlen lithographs about this big of pussycats. One that the modern owns, a wonderful, that cat on a pink ground, a fabulous summer cat, and then the winter cat, which is not as well drawn, but that's beautiful. I have some wonderful prints by Jacques Villon. I have about 6 prints of Villon. I have a painting by the best painter of Parma in the 20th century. It was a still life in the kitchen. He was 90 when I met him. He can no longer be about.
Who is that?
Morandi. Not Morandi. I studied with Morandi. I have a Morandi.
He was your teacher.
Yeah, I studied with him. This was Morbetti. A few pieces of oceanic sculpture, an African coffin.
Oh, you too.
A 17th century Madonna with 2 donnas. It's a random collection. And I have to say, I love being in a room and looking at the paintings and objects that I have. It's also great satisfaction to me.
Well, that last thing that he just said, I totally agree with. But other than that, it's completely different. I'm Pee-wee's Playhouse. No, I collect comic book art, original comic book art. Pretty much everything up on the wall is comic book art, from the 40s through the 60s and 70s. And because I edit a lot of books of comics at Pantheon, I usually, from one project, either buy or get as a gift something that had something to do with the book. So like Chris Ware did an advertising stand-up dummy thing for Jimmy Corrigan, and I have that. But I'm totally into, in terms of like art, buying art, hanging it on the wall, and having it make me not want to kill myself. It's comic books.
Fritz the cat? You got Fritz the cat?
Don't have any R. Crumb. Don't have Fritz the cat. But this guy named Kim Deitch, who was a contemporary of his, who's still very much around, and who I do publish. I have a couple of his things.
I was just curious what music influences you.
I'm sorry.
What music influences you?
Above all, Bach and Mozart, and then swiftly to Ray Charles, and I like a lot of music. I mean, I'm very eclectic, and I don't have, in my life in general, I don't have favorite anything. I don't have favorite foods, I don't have favorite painters, I don't have favorite music. I just don't seem to operate that way. So music, it really is an issue of quality rather than content.
Joy Division and New Order. Sorry. But when I'm at work, I either have the classical station on all day or one of the jazz stations on all day. I forget. There's two of them. QXR is and they're doing their fund drive now. Oh my God, it's so painful. It's like they should have some kind of system so that when you give the money, then you get switched to a version of the station that doesn't have the constant prating. I mean, I understand, but it's like, okay, I gave you the money, stop talking.
There's an app for that.
There should be an app for that, big time. Over there.
This is a question for Milton Glaser. And you're interested in the For Poppy with Love campaign that you did. It was somewhat mysterious, the way that it was delivered to the public in New York. Do you think that that was an effective campaign idea, keeping this air of mysteriousness to a campaign before actually revealing it?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last thing you said.
Do you think that was an effective campaign idea to deliver the To Poppy with Love campaign as something that was mysterious before actually revealing it to the public?
I don't know how to answer that question.
It's so mysterious, I've never heard of it. To
It
Poppy
was
with
for Poppy Records.
It was Poppy Records, which was a small publishing company by a guy named Kevin Eggers. I did hundreds of things for. I have no idea how successful or effective any of that stuff was.
What year are we talking?
He had a long stretch. He started in the 80s and he went through the 90s and probably went out of business about 5 years ago. So, but it was one of those small companies that had a short and effective run, and then just disappeared for any number of reasons, including Mr. Eggers' bad behavior.
Whose bad behavior?
The owner of the company.
Oh.
I don't need a microphone, I'm pretty loud.
Oh,
sorry.
This question is for Chip. I was just wondering, given that you write books and you love comic books, if you had any plans to write a graphic novel.
Well, I got in big trouble last summer for answering this question, but I answered it. I've written a long-form Batman graphic novel for DC Comics that is currently being drawn, and it's taking forever. But the guy who's drawing it is really taking his time and being very meticulous about it, and but the way DC operates is they don't really want to promote any project like that until it's put on a schedule, and I can sort of understand that. So I can't really say anything more about it, but it's looking really, really terrific, and that was a true dream come true for me. And it's just so bizarre to write a script and then watch somebody draw it and figure it out. It's like weird magic or something. But yes.
Milton, I just wanted to ask you, if you use yourself as a model ever for your illustration, the satyrs resemble you. Do you ever use yourself as model?
I don't think so. Sometimes when you're drawing and you need a drawing of a hand, you will sort of look at your hand, you'll sort of do that. But how would you do that? Would you you mean a photograph of yourself that you use as reference or something?
I don't know. I would ask you that question.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
No, I don't think so. I mean, we are all narcissists to some degree, so I suppose we tend to draw things that look like ourselves. I mean, that's maybe inevitable. But
that is a good question, though. Do you draw a lot from life, or?
yeah, Not as often as I did 20 years ago, for sure. But whenever the occasion, and mostly it's still life or landscape rather than figures, because you can't get anybody to sit still long enough for that. But I love drawing. I love the act of drawing. And it's one of the great losses for young people who go to school and don't take courses in drawing because they have to learn the computer programs.
Right.
Because that's the only way to make a living. But the act of drawing is just one of the great experiences of life.
I have a question. How many people have seen the documentary of Milton Glaser? If you haven't, you should see it. You'll enjoy it.
Mr. Glaser, I was just wondering, you have such great facility with drawing, and you started out that way, but your career has taken such an extraordinary turn in terms of the variety of things that you've been involved with. And most people who, start out with a pencil or a paintbrush or whatever don't end up doing buildings and magazines and grocery stores and things. How do you think it happened for you that you got such an incredible variety in terms of what you do?
I think it's just about curiosity and boredom. My great model was Picasso in one sense, which was the idea that as soon as he had mastered something, he abandoned it. So you saw this extraordinary commitment to the idea of developing ideas and no commitment to his own history. And I love that idea. I love the idea that you can leave your accomplishment behind and go elsewhere. And so I don't know what disposes somebody to do that. I mean, for me, it just was a strange set of opportunities. I mean, I started doing one thing, doing illustration. I started doing cartoons before I did anything else, and then I went on to drawing, and then I...
You did cartooning professionally?
Well, the earliest work I did were illustration, cartoon illustration. Yeah, I did.
But like
starting right after I got out of high school.
With speech balloons and all that, or?
When necessary. No, I didn't do comic strips.
Okay.
I just did individual drawing, cartoon-like drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had opportunities like going into the magazine business because Clay Felker was a friend of mine, and when New York Magazine in the Herald Tribune folded, he said, let's do a couple of prototypes. So we started New York Magazine, and then I met a guy named Joe Baum, who was a great restaurateur, said, why don't you help me do this restaurant? I designed a couple of restaurants. Then when New York Magazine was folding, because Rupert Murdoch had bought it, I met Jimmy Goldsmith, who had supermarkets, and I started designing supermarkets, which I did for an awful long time. I designed supermarkets for 20 years. I designed about 200 of them, and one thing led to another, and I just thought, well, why not? I mean, but there's some great, it really is a personality issue more than anything else. Some people, like one of my heroes, Morandi, like doing the same thing over and over again and are sublime at doing that thing, and others, like Picasso, like the idea of moving from one place to another, and this restless inquiry about everything. And I'm a curious guy. I like the visual world, and I like all manifestations of it. And I really have to say, I enjoy doing a rug as much as I enjoy designing a supermarket. I mean, it all seems to me one thing, just one thing.
Milt, since you don't have favorites, I won't ask you what your favorite project is, but
ask me.
I won't ask you what your favorite project is or was, but well, I'm going to get there in a different way.
I had a lot of projects. I mean, it was great doing New York Magazine because it was great socially. You were sort of the middle of New York universe, right? all the good writers, and everybody was sort of working as part of a community. And that sense of attachment to communal stuff is very satisfying.
Well, Chip mentioned that he had a dream of a lifetime doing a graphic novel. What is or would be your dream of a lifetime project?
What's like the dream project that you would like to do that you haven't gotten to do yet?
I don't think that way. I mean, my sense is, what I like to believe, is that there's opportunity in every project you get, and you never know what's going to provide a source of inspiration. I have a wonderful project now. There's a terrific supermarket in New York called Fairway. Any Fairway customers here? Great supermarket. It has the best stuff at the lowest prices, and it really is true. It is. And my wife has been shopping there for 35 years, and out of the blue, about 6 months ago, they called and said some white people from Connecticut were giving them a lot of money to expand, and they're going to have 16 Fairway stores, which is astonishing. So they have to design all their packaging, which is about 1,000 packages. So we started doing that. It's so much fun. Because I love the food world and the restaurant world. I used to be the underground gourmet together with Jerome Snyder for New York Magazine, where we wrote about cheap restaurants, which was something nobody was writing about in those days. And I know a lot about food, and I love being in the supermarket business. So this is a kind of ideal world for me. Today we designed a can of tuna fish. It's great.
Do you have to step up your staff in order to meet the demand of this stuff? You can just sort of do it package by package?
You know, it's very funny. At the studio now, we work so fast. I love the idea of velocity in design. I mean, I always try to tell my students they have no idea of their own capacity. So we can design 5 packages a day, which we do all the time, because at a certain point you know how to do it. And I love the fact that people can move from their expectation of what is appropriate to 10 times the speed they thought they were capable of doing anything in the design world, particularly. And that's, I think that's thrilling. I love working fast.
How long did it take to do a book cover?
How long did it take?
I started with book covers in both of you. I'm curious how much you spend on
How long does it take to do a book cover? It can take 20 seconds or it can take 6 months, is how I would say it. I mean, especially since the computer. Because I sort of straddle the do-it-by-hand generation. I was the last generation of graphic designers to be taught with no computer at all. And then learned it once I had been working for 6 or 7 years at Knopf and Random House. So, but I would never, ever want to go back.
No.
Me
neither.
Oh my God. Just setting type alone took 2 days. Well, I guess you all.
But your sense of form about what type means and what setting type means was so informed by that experience.
Absolutely. I feel so lucky. I wouldn't want it any other way. And when I started teaching at SVA and they all sat at computers, I was just like, oh my God, stand up everybody. Let's go over to this other room. Yeah, it's so important. But yes, velocity, my God, you can do it so fast. And then email. You email your stuff to everybody. It's as close as we'll ever get to teleportation. And for work, it is teleportation. It's unbelievable.
I remember just one example, and I hate to be the geezer talking about the old days, but if you wanted a picture of a horse as reference, you'd have to go up to the public library, right? A picture collection, take out that took you half a day, and by the time you get to the, now you go, there's a horse, and amazing. I disagree with you about one thing, which is to say, and this has been validated in some area, that for many people in categories of work, there's been no increase in productivity using the computer as opposed to doing things by hand. And I think that is entirely about the convention that you're dealing with. If you think it takes a day to do a book jacket, it'll take you a day whether you're doing it by hand or doing it on the computer. I mean, most of that stuff about productivity has to do with your own image of how long it'll take you, right? And that image can be shifted, obviously, but it's interesting to see. When we were at Pushpin Studios back in the 60s, we were doing 4 or 5 book jackets a day. And when somebody came to work for us, they would do half a book jacket a day. And we had to tell, no. That's not how we work here.
Was there a experience that really launched you on, or launched your name or your company, your studio, that was formative? Or is there something that you recommend to a designer or designers that could start their own studios today? And I remember also I read an interesting article about light and how you perceive light in your creation.
It's hard to tell. You're talking to me or to...
Those are 2 completely different questions. Those are 3 completely different questions. And the last one was the use of light in your work.
Use of light in my work. I'm conscious of light, partially because I spent a long time etching. And in etching, if you're not doing strictly linear, the whole thing is about how you can use a series of little tiny lines to create light. I mean, etching in that way is entirely about light, but you go through it very laboriously, and you have to be very observant about cross-hatching and building up form and so on. So I've always been since I started doing etching, that's what I studied in Italy with Morandi. I've been very conscious of the idea of light and how you depict it, although I never thought about whether I had a particular attitude towards it. But what else? What was the other part of the question? An event.
The inevitable, how do I get started?
It's just an experience that was really formative,
Oh,
that you recommend for others when they start on their own.
An experience that was transformative that you would recommend to other people to help them get started in their business?
I don't know anything about business. No, it's true. I really don't. I mean, I never, except, I've been running a business for 50 years or so I must know more than I think I know. But it has never been anything that's interested me, except as a means of surviving, which is, of course, why one is interested in it. But I have no advice on the subject, and I think anything that followed my path, or anyone who would not be happy about the result.
Well, we're very happy with the result of your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.